Hi guys, my name is Sydney Contreras-Macias, and this is my Omni project, Feminist Criticism on the Ideals of Women in the 1950s. My mentor for my English 201 honors class was Jane Mishinsky. Let's get started. This is an overview of my project, and it is how I researched how the novel The Woman's Room by Marilyn French utilizes feminist criticism to undermine female gender stereotypes in America during the 1950s. So while I was reading the novel and going back and forth between theories on the Purdue website, I realized that a lot of the techniques and storylines that were involved in her novel was very similar to what concepts and themes that feminist criticism followed, and so it made it really easy to connect the dots between feminism and how in literature she uses that to help send a broader message about the stereotypes that she lived through in America during the 1950s. Feminist criticism theory, straight from the Purdue website, explains how the theory is concerned with the ways in which literature and other cultural productions reinforce or undermine the economic, political, social, and psychological oppression of women. This theory looks at how aspects of our culture are mainly male-dominated, and through this theory we are able to expose that in writings about women in explicit and implicit forms. It is very aware and more honest in the diverse areas of our culture that we're able to look at the book and then look at our lives and see how they collide. Roles, expectations, assumptions, and stereotypes. How are these represented in then culture in the novel? So it was very common in the 1950s for women to be held up to the housewife expectation. That was their society role. Their role included a lot of things like cooking, cleaning, taking care of the children, meeting with their husband's expectations. As you can see, male dominance and being very submissive towards their husbands was a very troubling theme, I believe, towards how we represent a woman in our society. And in the novel, it is also the same. Women are told that they have one thing to do, and that's to stay at home. Their education and career-wise isn't really brought up or supported by any of the characters. If anything, when it is brought up, it is immediately shut down. And these expectations of these women follow the stereotypes of the housewife, and it's very to see how she might have wrote the novel based on the society that she was facing in the 1950s. Common space and feminist criticism. The feminist criticism theory follows a couple of common space which in everything which I'd like to share. Number one, in every domain where patriarchy reigns, woman is other. She's marginalized, defined only by her difference from male norms and values. Number two, all feminist activity, including feminist theory and literary criticism, has as its ultimate goal to change the world by prompting gender equality. Number three, gender issues play a part in every aspect of human production and experience, including the production and experience of literature, whether we are consciously aware of these issues or not. So to sum it up in basic terms, the main reason why we explore feminist criticism within novels is to see how the women are separated from the male norms and how she is defined. She is defined as the opposite, she is defined as other. All feminist activity, all novels and everything has a goal to change the world. There is a reason why we are going in and why we are exploring these roles, why we are exposing the types of oppression, and how we are going to help prompt gender equality. And that's through briefly and thoroughly researching how the theory collides with the culture and with the novel. Types of oppression. There are a lot of types of oppression present in the women's room. There's political, social, and psychological that I've noticed. The oppression of women through social and psychological abuse is apparent through how the main character is influenced by them. An example of oppression in the novel is how common it was for men to beat on their wives. There was even some social oppression in terms of a lack of mental health care. I have a quote that I really liked, and that spoke in it at the bottom. It says, "There are so much easier ways to destroy a woman. You don't have to rape or kill her. You don't even have to beat her. You can just marry her." There is a scene in the novel where they are talking about men only being on the radio, and one of the characters mentioned that only women get on the radio if they were murdered. So it immediately portrays women as they only get attention when they are portrayed as victims. And they even bring up Eleanor Roosevelt, but they say, oh, but everybody makes fun of her. So Eleanor Roosevelt was a human rights activist and former white lady in the political world during that time. But even in the novel, all they did was make fun of her for her political aspirations, and right away that's kind of setting like like a woman in politics, like that's funny, like we can't go along with that. And the social oppressions was of course enforced on them by their just gender stereotypes and expectations placed upon them, so they were really stuck in a box and not really allowed to escape it. And psychological, there was a lot of toxic behaviors that went on between the characters. A great example is how one housewife did end up slitting her wrist and attempting a suicide attempt. And examples including that, suicide attempts, over drinking, and harm towards children were all effects of the psychological errors that these women had faced and had to go through, and was really their only coping mechanism. And no one was there to help, or no one was there to lend a hand. They were expected to do everything by themselves. So of course that these women were facing these types of oppression, they were going to have a negative impact on how they dealt with it internally and externally. Aspect of education, there's this quote: when Norm, Myra's former wife, responded to her when she had expressed her wants of getting a PhD and going forward with teaching, the quote reads, "He pulled his big gun. They would be guys. They would give her a long time. Male professors insisting she screw her way to a degree. In 3 months, the protection she had sought had already become oppressive." So right away, again, the aspect of education in a woman's life did not fit in with her societal roles and was another form of social oppression. There wasn't a lot of, you never heard of these big stories of women that went to Harvard, went to Yale. You just got the stories of the young woman who got married at the age of 19 and right away had children to start a family, and that's because that's how it was. For a joke that they lined up in the novel was how women only went to college to get a missus degree, meaning that she would only go to find a husband. And it's really degrading and really doing a disservice to all like aspiring females in the 1950s. It really wasn't a way to like help support or bring cause to, hey, women can do this. They are willing and we should support them. Instead, they were brought down by their husbands in familiar societies, mainly because it didn't fit into that one society role. Physical oppression of women. Rape and sex culture was a very disturbing and common theme throughout. A important quote that I read was, "I've often seen blushing young men with shining eyes behave in the same way, but no one says of them that they want to be raped. If after taking a few steps forward, then they decide to retreat, no one accuses them of being cunt teasers. In fact, the disappointed woman probably thinks it's all her fault." So the rape culture then is very similar to how it is now, unfortunately. A lot of people will woman blame, slut shame, and try to portray the woman as the instigator. But when young men do it, and all of a sudden it's like, oh no, we don't want to do anymore, it's often easy and very convenient for the men for the woman to believe that they did something that was their fault. But with the roles reversed, it's still the woman's fault she gets raped. There was a quote saying how women actually do want to be raped in the novel, but that's only to make guys feel less bad about the action that they have done. And with Myra's attempted gang rape and Kris's actual rape that occurred in the novel, one thing is made clear, and it's that the women always get blamed, that the men aren't being held accountable or held responsible for their actions. It's always another form of oppression on women, which again can take negative psychological terms. In fact, when Kris's mother Val found out, she just straight up planted like all men are rapists. Like, they rape us with their eyes, with their laws, with their codes. And of course, these women are going to get a form of trauma held within them. And it's really through them not being spoken out, really. They didn't feel heard. Like, nowadays, we have the Me Too movement where sexual assault survivors are given a platform. But in the 1950s, women didn't have that. They kind of were torn down and made fun of and not really taken seriously. And so I feel like the rape and sex culture represented within the novel does play a role into the woman's expectations of the 1950s, and that was to stay quiet and to just play along and just let it blow over and let the male remain dominant. Undermining stereotypes of women. The reader is able to observe how each woman is represented and ultimately falls victim to the expectations set on them by the culture. This novel supports the main ideas about what and where a woman's place is with a breakthrough with Myra. So within the novel, there is just the most typical stereotypes of women in the 1950s you can find, with an expectation of Myra, who is the only character in the novel who has a feminist awakening and starts realizing, you know what, I don't want to do this, I don't want to live like this. So she does decide to pursue her college. She got divorced. She moved and she went to Harvard and was working on her PhD in education literature. And that's really where she met some new feminist friends. She kind of almost started like a rebirth of herself. And that's kind of how a transition from then to now, how women have evolved. We were able to take a stand now. We are able to get our education. We're able to fight for what we want. And I think they used Myra as the symbol to help prompt gender equality by saying, hey, we as women want this, and we're going to go and chase after it. And we can help and bring along as much women as we want with us. And I feel like it was really empowering symbol to have Myra, as she did battle through those societal expectations. She did go through that rough half in the first half of the novel, but with the second half, you're able to see how she evolves and how she actually helps become a feminist herself and takes things into her own hands. So what I think is really important is to talk about court cases and how their relevance relates to the 50s and 70s, and into how Maryland French used them. So I'm going to do a quick brief on each court case. So in 1970, we had Schultz versus Wheaton Glasgow. And this was a law that said that women cannot receive lower wages for a job with similar tasks to those of men. 1972, we have Einstein versus Bard, and that established the right for unmarried people to accept contraceptions like birth controls and condoms, likely with the married couples. So now everyone had the right. 1972, Title IX of the Education Amendment, no person in the U.S. should be excluded or be subjected to discrimination under any educational institute. Roe v. Wade protects a pregnant woman's liberty to choose abortion without excessive government interference. 1976 was when the first marital rape law went into effect. That would help and support women, and they could no longer use the excuse that my husband raped me as a way to discredit them. They found it okay, just because your husband did it doesn't make it okay. In 1978, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act was held along the lines of you cannot be turned away or fired from a job due to your pregnancy. And what's really funny is that these were court cases active in Maryland French's life, but they're all situations in the 1950s where they happened. But it's really funny because, especially in today's society, we're still going through these things. Abortion is a really hot topic right now, has always been. And even though there may be laws that say that we can do it, and how women cannot receive lower wages, and how no person should be subjected to educational discrimination, there are still these problems going on that were present in the 1950s novel that were somehow made to seem solutions in the 70s, but we're still facing with it now. So I think along in the lines with feminist criticism, these court cases and their relevance is really strong in the terms of how women are treated and respected by society. And each example from the novel, each of the court cases, there is a form in the novel where each is represented, whether it be a woman claiming that she can't get an abortion because it was against her religions, or a woman actively being beaten and sexually assaulted by their husbands and them having to just go along with it. And the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, where she said she was able to get a job but only because she didn't look pregnant yet. I feel like all these collide with each other and really make a strong statement in terms of the feminist movement. And that brings us to now. How were women made to feel that they had to fit into their societal expectations and standards, and how does feminist criticism theory handle that? Throughout my reading of the novel, looking at the court cases, and looking into modern day society, this novel helped ring a bell. Even though it was published in the 1970s, it can still bring much fact to the 21st century. We are able to see how women then and now were held through oppressive forms through political, social, economic. We are able to view how they were not only oppressed in terms of society, but in terms of within their own lives. These women have been through hell and back. They really had no way out. They were forced to go through the housewife expectations. The novel undermined these stereotypes by making a very clear message that women, we need to help and we need to continue fighting, because similar to the court cases, just because it was put into effect doesn't mean that it was put into total fairness. The way that these women were represented in the novel are still ways that women are treated nowadays, and it's crazy to see how things in the 1950s and things in the 2020, we're still going through these things. I believe that Marilyn French wanted to help prompt gender equality by helping put more power into the feminist, the women's rights movement. She really wanted to help crash these expectations and help make women feel more empowered and make women feel more accepted and make women feel more celebrated. And I believe that using feminist criticism theory, we're able to view in the novel how she undermines that and what the overall purpose was, and how even now we need to continue fighting, and we will keep fighting until everyone is made equal, everybody has access to the same things that the males do. And it's with that that we are going to be able to contribute to a more functioning and more stable society for futures to come. This is my MLA citations page. And this is my feminist criticism on the ideas of women in the 1950s, with help from my mentor, James Mashinsky. Thank you guys so much. I really hope that this project gave you guys some more insight on what you didn't know, would have known. And thank you.